On Monday, the Supreme Court handed a big win over to those of us who support LGBT equality by refusing to hear cases that could uphold same-sex marriage bans in certain states. After the news came out, conservative heads started exploding all over the internet. Now let's go to Brian Fisher first and see how he's taking the news.
This is the de facto Roe v. Wade of sodomy-based marriage. Let me repeat, this inaction, this decision not to decide, this action not to act, this represents the de facto Roe v. Wade of sodomy-based marriage. It's going to be virtually impossible now to stop this press and this push toward nationalizing, imposing on every state in the union marriage that is based on the infamous crime against nature. The Supreme Court today, they're trying to pretend we're not involved, we haven't settled anything, we haven't addressed this issue, it's not before us, we're not going to deal with it, we're not going to make a ruling on this, but they have made a ruling. Their decision today imposes sodomy-based marriage on 11 states that don't want it, that voted against it, that have constitutional and legal protections in their states against the recognition of sodomy-based marriage. And the Supreme Court said, we don't care. Just suck it up. You're going to have to deal with it. We're going to impose it on you by our refusal to act. That's the bottom line. Supreme Court cannot dodge responsibility here. They've made a decision themselves today. The Supreme Court just imposed same-sex marriage on 11 additional states. It's unconscionable, unconstitutional, and completely, absolutely un-American.
You know, I think Brian Fisher is a crime against nature. But seriously, it's unconscionable, unconstitutional, and un-American. Well, wait, I thought freedom and self-determination was 100% American. How about unconstitutional? Okay, well, let's talk about that. See, it's not really unconstitutional because, you see, we have this clause called the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. That prohibits states from denying any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of under the law. So we've got the Equal Protection Clause protecting people and basically trying to make sure that everybody is treated equally. Now, this also says the laws of a state must treat an individual in the same manner as others in similar conditions and circumstances. Well, I can get married. Brian Fisher can get married. Kim Kardashian can get married for 72 hours. But Bob down the road, who's been in a long-term relationship with Steve, can't. At least he can't down in Brian Fisher's world. That, I think, is un-American. We're supposed to be a nation here that expands rights, not contracts them for, silly reasons such as, it makes me uncomfortable. It's icky. Gay people are unnatural. Which, of course, that's not true at all. Homosexuality exists in nature as well. So the only thing is that my book says it's dirty. My book that I read religiously, literally, from the Bronze Age, says it's dirty. It says it's bad. Whatever, man. You know what, Brian? Suck it up, Buttercup. Gay marriage is here. Anyway, he goes into how it imposes, quote, sodomy-based marriage on people who don't want it. Now, this is how Fisher sees this whole thing. He sees this as imposing gay marriage on him. But in reality, it has nothing to do with him or his life. But for some reason, it just rubs him just the wrong way. Or maybe it rubs him the right way. Who knows? But this whole thing just kind of gets to him. It eats at him at a personal level. And people like him, they just can't stand it. They just can't stand it. Okay, so speaking of people who do or do not want gay marriage, it turns out that the American people don't agree with Brian Fisher. Imagine that. Gallup polling shows, and this was done in May, shows that a majority, around 54 to 55% of Americans, now support the institution of same-sex marriage. Could that be higher? Yes. Obviously, it could be a lot higher. And to be honest, I think after this ruling, it probably will get a little bit higher. Because when people actually know people that are gay, and they're their neighbors, they're their friends, they're their family members, when they know people who are gay, they are much more likely to accept them. They are much more likely to look at them and say, well, hey, you guys aren't so bad. How is this going to hurt my marriage? It doesn't. So you getting married doesn't affect me at all personally, like Brian Fisher and Pat Robertson and all those other guys said that it would. Well, it's not so bad. These are good people. So, you know, all that fear-mongering, I guess, was wrong. But if Fisher wasn't the only one for flipping out about this whole thing, next we have Ted Cruz, who called this inaction, ironically, of the Supreme Court, quote, judicial activism at its worst. So, not making a ruling is somehow judicial activism at its worst. I guess this is a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. At least in Ted Cruz's mind. Now, of course, the court goes and makes the, I should say, unless the court goes and makes the decision to stop gay marriage retroactively and undo all the progress we've made, which is still a possibility, by the way. There are still cases out there where the court could go and say, okay, never mind. We're going to go back on this and let states reinstitute bans of gay marriage. They could do that. But they haven't yet. So, I mean, optimism. Now, he also called this non-decision, quote, tragic and indefensible. And in reaction, he crafted his own bill, nicknamed the You're Not Married Anymore bill. That's not what it's called, but it's gained the moniker of You're Not Married Anymore because what it would do is it would ban same-sex marriage and render civil unions unrecognizable. Basically, oh, you have a civil union? Oh, you're gay married? Not anymore. We just passed this ban and it retroactively cancels all of your marriages. Oh, look at this. Ted Family Values Cruz is trying to break up families. Well, apparently they don't count as families because they're gay. Now, Ted Cruz thinks that it's okay if citizens vote on things like this in the states. In fact, that's what he prefers. I want the citizens to vote. I want the citizens to vote. Federal government should stay out of state affairs. States' rights, states' rights. Well, that's kind of funny because earlier this year, Ted Cruz went out and blasted President Obama for not locking up people in Colorado over breaking federal marijuana laws. But Ted, what about respecting states' rights, bro? What happened? What happened to states' rights? Oh, that's right. State rights only apply when you want them to apply. I see. So you're essentially a states' rights hypocrite. Now, more conservative reaction comes in from the Family Research Council. Now, they wrote, quote, this judicially led effort to force same-sex marriage, in quotes, on people will have a negative consequences for our republic, not only as it relates to natural marriage, but also undermining the rule of and respect for law. As more and more people lose their livelihoods, yes, losing their livelihoods, because they refuse to not just tolerate but celebrate same-sex marriage, Americans will see their true goal, which is for activists to use the court to impose a redefinition of natural marriage on the entire nation. And for what reason would anyone want to do that? It makes no sense. And look, these guys, ironically, these guys are butthurt from this ruling. Now, the National Organization for Marriage weighs in and said, quote, this is wrong on so many levels. First, the entire idea that marriage can be redefined from the bench is illegitimate. Marriage is a union of one man and one woman. It has been this way throughout the history of civilization and will remain this way no matter what any unelected judges say. Except when marriage was not between one man and one woman. It was between one man and many women. But they, of course, forget that the traditional definition of marriage has changed throughout history. They tend to leave out that fact that what we consider now, today, as traditional marriage is a relatively new phenomenon in human history. But, you know, look, the fact is that these groups are living on a different planet in a different time period with their own definition of marriage. You want to talk about redefining marriage, they are attempting to redefine it themselves. The irony. Now finally, the focus on the family weighed in by asking, well, what about the children? What about the children, guys? Well, they say, quote, our concern continues to be for the children who deserve to grow up with both a mom and a dad, as well as for the religious freedom rights of people who strongly believe in God's design for marriage and want to live consistently with those beliefs. The focus on the family tends to miss the studies that show that children do just as well and sometimes even better in same-sex households when compared to heterosexual households. And finally, look, all these groups make it sound like this non-ruling by the Supreme Court will somehow force their straight marriages to end and force them into gay marriages. As for the religious freedom point, this doesn't impact your religious freedom at all. Look, the reason these people are so mad is because they're not in control anymore. On this issue and on a lot of other issues. They're mad because they're not getting away, or I should say they're not getting their way, and they want to throw a temper tantrum. Nothing but a religious temper tantrum. I told you before that they were going to cry persecution and thump that Bible. For people like Cruz and Fisher, that's their go-to move. The crying and the Bible thumping. But I do have some news on some of the governors in the states affected. Apparently, they're not as gung-ho about thumping that Bible as I thought. They either stopped fighting, grudgingly accepted it, or welcomed it. For example, Governor Scott Walker said, quote, the fight is over in Wisconsin. Governor Gary Herbert said that he was disappointed, but said ultimately, we are a nation of laws, and we here in Utah will uphold the law. There you have it. It's just like I said before. The dominoes will continue to fall, and the force of history, the force of change and progress is here. It ain't stopping.